Welcome to this episode of A Palava, Architecture on the Radio, a series by David Paschek. In September, I visited New York and had the opportunity to meet Kit and Phillip vonDalwig in their Brooklyn office and home to record this conversation. When thinking about being an architect in New York, many myths and questions arise. They were very patient to answer those questions and talk about the great opportunities this city offers. Since Philipp is from Germany, studied there and worked for a time in Austria, he is a great resource for comparing the understanding of architecture on both sides of the ocean. I also focus on building codes and the profession in the US, and Kit explains how complicated it really is and why it never comes up with the clients. Kit and Philipp met at Columbia University during their master's program and later founded their firm vonDalwig Architecture. Today they work on a wide range of project types from multifamily housing and residential interiors to office and art spaces. One of their specialties is the renovation of townhouses, where they are able to transform the historic structures into homes for modern families, sometimes within regulated neighborhoods. They often introduce elements such as courtyards and unusual openings to allow daylight to enter and enhance the structure in surprising ways, creating a great sense of lightness. I'm guest here with A Palava at vonDalwig Architects, and I would ask for our listeners, you have heritage from different parts of the world. How comes you set up your office in New York?
So my name is Philipp vonDalwig. I'm part of vonDalwig Architecture. And yeah, to ask that loaded question, I'm from Germany, studied there, and I'm sure we get a little bit more into it, but had different experience in Europe and came to New York in 2000 for my master degree at Columbia University, where I met Kit, my partner in crime and wife. And we started working together after being part of different offices in between, and actually did some detours into advertisement and in other worlds. In 2003 or 4?
5.
Yeah, maybe 2005 we started to really form our own architecture office at the time. But to answer your question, why here in New York, I think there was just an opportunity to do something which it was more the experience, since you can stay a certain amount of time on a certain visa, and we met and fall in love and fall in love with the city as well, to experience that. There was no really a foresight how long we would do that, or if it works or not, or if we go back to our countries where we originated. It just worked that way, I think. There wasn't a master plan from the beginning. There was just an opportunity.
So when you finished your master degree, is it hard to become architect in New York?
No, not necessarily, but I mean, I went to school in the States, so I was already nearly licensed. I just had to take my exams because I worked for several years before.
Okay, so you need to have some practice time, and then you can get licensed. Is there an exam on this license?
There are about 10, at that time 12 exams. Now it's 10, I think. They changed it, but there are quite a number of exams. It took me about a year and a half to finish them. And then I got licensed.
Okay, so that's pretty hard task to fulfill.
Yeah, it's not as... it's different from Germany.
Okay.
Because you don't get licensed right after you graduate from school. Yeah.
When we think about producing architecture in the States, usually in Europe you have like the architect on the client side, one thing, and then you have the contractor on the other side. Is it that clear in the United States, or what kind of role does that play?
I mean, I think that's probably, I mean, that's a great way to enter this conversation. What is different between other cities and maybe other continents as well, where we saw an opportunity to work here and enter, you know, a fairly big city, a fairly competitive city, and find kind of our own footing. So the question you are asking, I never ask here.
Okay.
We never had a client who asked us if we're licensed or not, basically. In the beginning, we were asked to produce designs. Architecture, websites, product design, industrial design, design strategy, everything which is in that culture of creating, basically. And it wasn't, the question was less, are we architects or not? More so that there were certain tasks which were interesting to us and others thought we can deliver that, right? The first years, actually, we worked with product designers and graphic designers together, pitching towards advertisement and branding opportunities rather than straightforward architecture. So why I'm saying that there's a certain blend that architecture belongs to a culture which is a little bit broader than just the service of architecture and really more the definition of delivering design, right, to a certain degree. And much later than in our career here, well, not much later, but it was then important to move on and going back in a way to more a traditional service architecture combined with design. But it wasn't the first thing that we thought, okay, we have to be licensed to operate in New York. Mm-hmm. And that was also it's not the conversation I think we have, right?
When you engage with the municipality on your projects, do you need the license there, or is it not the problem?
You do need a license.
You do, yeah.
Okay.
You do. The system is a little bit different that you have an expediter, they're called. And it doesn't matter in which stage you are in your career, there's always a person in between who does a lot of the paperwork towards the Department of Building. That's certainly different than what I know from Europe. Mm-hmm. But we also have colleagues which run a very successful business and they're not licensed here. Yeah. So that's certainly one way to do it, right?
Well, it depends on the scope.
Yeah, on the scale which you're operating. Yeah.
I think that's a little bit what Philipp's saying. Just considering that when we went to Columbia, Bernard Schumi was the dean, and it was more geared towards not developing architects in the traditional sense, but just, I guess, creative, not thinkers, but, just a creative approach to how you can tackle different professions. Like a lot of the graduates from our class went into brand strategy or advertising or filmmaking or something totally different from architecture. And I think that's why we also stayed here a bit longer rather than going to maybe trying Berlin or some other city, is that I think New York offered those opportunities to kind of branch out and try different things within design and architecture.
And art. I mean, the intersection of other fields is much larger. And I can only, Kit is right on. I mean, there was in 2002, for once 9/11 happened, right? That was a huge impact on our architectural profession. There were very little jobs, and therefore a lot of people branched out into different disciplines and found their opportunities there. I think that gave us somewhat a good start, because we were not bound to just the architectural service part.
Mm-hmm. An important theme for vonDalwig architecture is the remodeling and renovation of brick townhouses in Brooklyn. Some of them are in landmark districts with strict historical regulations. How difficult is that to deal with? Because the historical code does not cover whole of Brooklyn.
So it doesn't.
Certain districts.
Certain
historical districts. It's just that currently a lot of our projects do fall within that district. Yeah. So we did deal with, it's called Landmarks Preservation Commission. We do deal with them quite often, yeah.
But they're quite strict, right?
They're very strict, and I think sometimes very unreasonable. But yeah, they're a bit strict, and it's hard to marry the two between historical approach and Department of Buildings public or safety. You know, they clash, and it's really trying to find the resolution to how to satisfy both. It's really complicated, actually.
You know, Brooklyn is only one borough out of New York City, right? Out of the 5 boroughs. And it's kind of important to say that, because other boroughs, Queens, Upper Manhattan, Middle, the Bronx, have very different typologies and different issues. That's very parts of Manhattan and Brooklyn very centric to that. But other things work very differently. And also on that note, I mean, what was interesting actually, which I didn't kind of had on my radar, is that, you know, most larger cities in Europe were built up again in the 60s, 70s, 80s. Here, there was never that impact of a major war. And therefore, the substance we're dealing with, even though the city is still very young, is from 1880 to 1920. So most of these townhouses and what you are referring to, brownstones, is from that time period. No? And the Landmark Commission we talked about is kind of holding on to that period. And that's, you know, you have to deal with it. And that gives somewhat a framework we can operate in.
Yeah. But I think also part of it is the last maybe 20 years, Brooklyn has grown so quickly, and it has become such a, you know, the Brooklyn brownstone, or the idea of the Brooklyn brownstone has, you know, come to more, given more attention to a lot more people, and they've shifted from the city to Brooklyn. And so I think all these agencies then rethink some of the regulations and kind of start to control it more and more. So that's why they're getting a lot more strict. Because, you know, because of the influx of all these people moving and renovating. And back to what Philipp was saying, in the past, Brooklyn was a lot denser. So a lot of these brownstones housed way more people. And now that families are moving, they're converting it to one family houses, maybe 2 families, and that changes the use. And they want to expand and extend and do all these things for their one family. That's why all these regulations start coming into play to control all this development.
But it's up to you as architects to like communicate in between those departments, or they don't work together?
Oh, no, they do. I mean, one is asking for the sign-off of the other one. So the Department of Building is the one agency which kind of bundles and approves a permit or application. And under that application, you went through Landmark, get their approval, then to go further in Department of Building. Right? Same with environmental protection. Same with Department of Transportation. So, you very often deal with subway lines below or next to your building. You deal with environmental issues, existing oil tanks, or some other environmental soil problems. And lately more and more FEMA maps, and that is the rising water and maps which you have to show in which district you are, and therefore you have to react as an architect to it when you do your mechanical equipment and so on and so forth. So all that gets bundled together at the Department of Building, which then at one point approve your ideas. Yeah.
Yeah, on the one model that you showed me before, you talked about photovoltaic elements that are obligatory on buildings. Is this a recent development, or is
it's over the last couple of years, so relatively new. The idea is that when you have a building envelope and you do a certain amount of work, you have to either provide a green roof or to reduce stormwater and water runoff and so on, or have to provide solar panels who
generate like a minimum kilowatt.
Generate a certain amount of energy. Yeah. So that's mandatory now in New York, and you see it actually throughout Manhattan and Brooklyn, all boroughs actually. These solar panels hanging all over the place.
Okay. When I visited your office, I saw a lot of models, and you told me for the creation of space, you returned of using this technique. How did that develop, and how do clients react? Or do you show them, or is this plainly for you, these models?
For both, really. Part of it is for us to develop the spaces, because we focus a lot on space. I mean, working in New York, you have to focus a lot on interior space, but that kind of trickles down even when we do ground-up buildings or something. We use that as a tool to, start to kind of tweak how we lay things out. And we also use it to show the client, because I sometimes find that clients don't read, even render. They could understand it, but, renderings are so deceiving, so it's great to see a physical model, and there they can start to understand certain things about the space. And so we use it for both for work and for,
I mean, I think it goes also back to our own history and how we studied architecture and where we learned the trade of architecture. So Kit, grew up in Hawaii, went to the university in Hawaii, and then learned and had her first job in Seattle. And I mean, you can say that better, but I think also a very hands-on experience how to build, and that they're real functional things to consider. And on my end, I worked in Austria in a very direct relationship to decision making. And I explained that a little bit. When we came to Columbia, it was kind of an offset away from that, very theoretical, a time where new tools were in place to generate 3D digital models. We used mainly programs which are used for movie creation, like Terminator and other ones, right? So really digital tools, where it was all about creating form and explaining that form, why it went that way, but the form was not tested.
Terminator. Terminator.
Well, I mean, like
Special effects.
Yeah, special effects.
It's like Terminator's really old.
Yeah. True. But
It's like Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah.
Like Tron or whatever.
Tron, yeah, it's a good example. But anything which lives in a certain environment, right? And that was rarely tested against real space and functionality and program, right? The program came always later, which means then suddenly space was kind of rearranged to fit that program, but it didn't came out of the demand of that. And we saw that here in New York, but throughout, that suddenly these buildings and spaces came up which we plainly reject as architecture which has any value to us. And to be sure that we have really the means to understand space these physical models came back. So it's kind of, we do both, right? So we design a lot of in 3D space. Actually, all our, it's all BIM based. We use a lot of digital tools, but then we testing it against physical models, which go from very tiny ones to larger ones to one-to-one mock-ups and so on. So we need these both scales to really be sure that that a space reads the way to fit the program and vice versa.
In your architecture, there is a very important point of getting light into these tight spaces of the New York structure. Do you simulate this, or is it also a question on the models, how to prove that it works?
I mean, you're referring to that some of our spaces and buildings have patios and spaces carved out, taking really valued space away, actually, which is the hardest thing, right? I mean, in New York City, square footage or the square meter price is so sky high, it's hard to explain a client that they rather have, a patio carved into or carved out of that. For us, the relationship between indoor and outdoor to create almost these artificial outdoor spaces for light and air, but also to have a certain depth and layering of space, quite important. Yeah. So light is one thing, but it's more the layering that you see through a glass panel into a green space from there into the next room, that it's not wall, door, opening, wall, room, that you have that layering. I think that's where it comes from. And certainly light has its part of that. Yeah.
The things that I saw on your website, that's always the craftsmanship is also really good. Is it hard to find people to work with in New York on this level?
I would say yes. It's, but we do have a number of people. We always, whichever contractor we work with to do the overall, we bring in like specialty people, like a stone person who we know and worked with a lot, or a mill worker, so certain things vendors, we have that control, and we hook them up, we connect them with the contractor. So that's one way we kind of control quality. But overall, to find a good contractor here is complicated for this scale of project, which isn't a low scale, it's not, but it's also, it kind of sits in the middle. It's always hard to find that person to take on.
And it works with a general contractor?
Yeah.
Always?
Most of the time, yes.
I mean, in general, I would say that money can buy quality in New York, but anywhere else in the world. But it's in New York, it's not a given that you reach quality. And it is interesting because in New York, you tap into multiple cultural backgrounds. So sometimes you have an amazing bricklayer or mason from Italy who knows his value, but also has the experience over generations as you have it in Europe. And others, you will find workers who can just barely do or know their trade, but also that has its price point, right? So it's a little bit you pay what you get for a situation, but I think you can achieve quality, but it is a timely thing to do here. Yeah, I mean, it's because the CB, and you learn that over time, that you understand why that is sometimes not the case, because it's a very fast-moving city, and we sometimes create retail spaces, small stores or flagship stores, and they maybe exist a year or two. And that's also the price point where they should be, right? So nobody wants to spend more money when they know they might be out of business in 2-3 years from now. It's really for that moment. Sometimes clients, residential clients, private clients, for them it's all about the moment where they're in currently. 2 kids, 3 kids, but at one point they will move on, which means they take a lot the resale value in consideration.
Okay, so the fluctuation is much higher.
Yeah, so the idea of building something for the next 100 years barely exists, right? And that has then a little bit to do with quality. Yeah. So quality is more a topic where, and that's why, so back to your first question, why we set up shop in New York, or maybe still get to that question, and not in Europe or somewhere else, or why we're doing it here, is that we have an amazing pool of very educated clients who actually appreciate quality.
Okay.
And that's really one of the reasons. So we really have to educate our clients about quality. It's more the price point to reach quality. That's I think where it kind of comes in. But for us, it's important, and it's not the best business model to be in quality. But for us, it's a certain standard which makes us sleepless when we see that something is not done the way it was planned. Other things we just plainly have to let go. But where you have a haptic relationship, which means you can see it and touch it on an everyday basis, I think it has to live up.
This is Apalava, Architecture on the Radio. I'm guest of Kit and Phillip vonDalwig, who run their office in Brooklyn, New York. In the next segment, we talk about the way competitions are run in the US and how architects are selected for public commissions. Can you talk a little bit about the scene doing competitions in New York? Are there competitions where you can participate? Is it difficult to get in? Does it make sense to participate in competitions in New York?
I think, but are you talking about
architectural competitions? I saw you did it for Chinatown. You did a competition for public space.
Yeah. That was a very conceptual competition. But competitions, I think, in Austria and the US is very, very different. Yeah, I think for the most part is more conceptual than. I don't think it's not normal that you win projects through competition.
Okay. So schools are not done, or for example, public projects?
No, I mean, they have a system here, like a RFP, a request for proposal type of system, where you also have to sign up with the city, and you get these requests you have to submit like qualifications and things like this. In that way, but it's not really a competition where you design a school and you could potentially.
Because I just participated on a school in Austria. 60 architects handed a complete scheme of a school in, and won. Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't really.
So the idea of, I think in Europe it was 400,000 euros or something above that. You had to public, probably change the numbers by now. No, that doesn't exist.
Okay.
And a lot of the foundations, the non-for-profits and other ones are sponsored and funded by private money, right? I mean, that's the system throughout the US, and therefore they don't have that set of rules. So sometimes you get invited to compete, and the 3-4 architects. Sometimes what Kit said first with this competition in Chinatown, or their government island competition, Governor's Island, there were a bunch of competitions which are more in the public realm or in the urban planning idea where we took part of, but it's mainly for it is a specific time of your office where you do that, and then at one point you move on.
Okay.
I think we did that the first maybe 10 years or so, where we were very active doing that. And at one point we moved away from that. So we rarely do competitions any longer. Yeah.
Okay, so basically you need, if you want to do some job in this kind, you need a connection to the sponsors, maybe.
Yeah.
Or to the institution.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes, you work your way towards, let's say you want to build a museum. I think it's a long way to be in the art world, doing galleries, and then slowly work your way up until you're in a pool of architects who get asked and send that the request for proposal, and then you do that.
Okay. But there are so many tasks in the public space that would be like jobs for architects, and this is all done on like this technical level of bidding to the city or the borough, or because when you design a public space, for example, that would be like a classical task to make a competition in Europe.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they do that, but kind of in a different way. It's not an open competition. So certain libraries, was it through the DDC or there's a...
So there are certain agencies in the city who send these requests for proposals to architects who fulfill certain measurements. So in the end, it's actually not so different from the open competition system in Europe, which is also by now, well, you want to design a school, well, show me that you already did 10 schools over that and this market value.
It's a smaller pool of architects. So I think every 2 or 3 years you apply for it, and if you get selected,
Then you get
whenever
chance.
they have requests for qualifications and proposals, you get asked and you can, but it's only at least at DDC there are different levels, and I think each level there's only maybe 10 or 12 firms, for small projects, medium, large. I mean, even like Annabelle Seldorf at one point got a recycling center, or they're different, but you have to be part of this kind of pool of, so it's not fully open, like in Europe.
You taught also at Columbia, I think, at one point?
I taught at UPenn in Philadelphia, and then I taught here at the new school, Parsons, the new school.
Okay.
At Columbia, I was teaching assistant. Yeah.
Okay. When you compare it to, you studied in Germany, when you compare it a little bit, these two systems of studying architecture, is it very different? Because one thing that comes up in my mind is like in Europe, you basically don't pay for studies. You have no fees. Well, it's quite expensive. In America, it's an investment. So you have to think about if it returns or not. I did not, but does this also change maybe the mindset?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's an undergrad program and then there's a graduate program, right? So I only experienced the graduate program where you do your master, which wasn't existing at the time in Europe. Well, now we have master programs almost at every university, I believe. There you're anyway at that stage a little bit more dedicated to what you do, because usually students are older, they already work maybe, and they know the value of what it takes to be another 1.5 or 2 years somewhere at school. So I taught more these students who already had a path behind them and were very focused on what they do. When I compare that to how I studied, I think the universities here, the academic and theoretical level is much higher than in Europe. To be honest, I never heard about Walter Benjamin in my life in Germany when I studied there. Here, it was kind of a household name. And that's throughout that you get a much better theoretical education. Where I could be critical, and that really depends on the university, is maybe the technical level and how you are sent off into the office world, that there is a discrepancy between what you were taught and what you can actually use in an office setting. I think that's a little bit different in Europe, where and it also depends when you go to the Kunsthochschule in Vienna or the one in Berlin. I think that might be similar to universities here versus when you go to one of the technical universities in Europe. That is a very different environment. Yeah, for sure.
It depends where you go to school.
Yeah. But you have to see that individually by university.
Yeah.
So,
I would say, yeah. And it's not that, maybe you think the architecture schools are just, the top, whatever. There are other architecture schools also here that don't cost that much.
Okay.
Like the school I went to for my bachelor's was not expensive.
Okay.
So it's different. There's so many schools here.
So you have all different levels you can...
Yeah. And there a lot of the students, let's say, just around the corner from where we're sitting here is Pratt Institute. They have a lot of grants for students coming from abroad. So it's not that you need, that you are in that mit Schulden beladen for the next years when you're out of school.
The understanding for architecture among inhabitants in New York, is this a topic also, or is there like maybe at schools some education on architecture or something like this? Do you know something about that?
I think it's a part of the fabric. Architecture is talked about. Everybody, since it's such a density, everybody has to deal with it. There's constantly some construction going up, and newspapers are reporting about it. I mean, there are sections in the New York Times and other magazines who are just saying, well, this is happening here, this is happening there. You have a very active museum scene like the MoMA, which has a lot to do with architecture. So I think it is as much part of art and fashion and other cultural venues.
But I think it's also very new. I don't know. When we first came to New York, it wasn't. I think it grew so, like we said in Brooklyn, it grew so much. In the city, they started building a lot more. I mean, I think Richard Meyer did that One West Side Highway apartment as a glass building, and Gwathmey Siegel did that in East Village. And all of a sudden, you have these new glass buildings that hasn't really happened in New York. And then now there's like a ton. They did the High Line and the kind of amount of new buildings, I think, in the last 15 to 20 years has, skyrocketed. That makes people more aware of,
I was wondering about the change of public space also.
Yeah,
because
certainly a lot to do.
I think
I thought when I was last time in New York, it was like unthinkable to go by bike.
Yeah.
And now it seems, it was possible. Yeah, I can do it. It's fun.
I think actually Bloomberg changed that a lot, because at that time there's Amanda Burden, who was the head of urban planning. They changed a lot of zoning, and they kind of brought up the bike lanes, and they changed the waterfront quite. That was a huge change, I think, since we moved here till now. I don't know if you've been to Williamsburg and Dumbo and the East River and Hudson. That has developed really in the last 15 years, I think.
I think there were certain phases in the city where public space and buildings somewhat merged. And back to your original question, I think people get more aware when that happens, when they can touch it and step into a space and so on. And that was, I think, the 80s, where you could trade height against public space, which means all these midtown little parks came up, and then there were some lobbies within the first floor of skyrise, and suddenly you saw an amazing lobby and you were like, oh God, right? And then there was this change of generations, which happened actually around when we studied here around 2000, that suddenly not any longer the SOMs and KPFs and IMPs were that important or still important, but other architects stepped up. And that was the time when Dylan's Graffiti won the High Line, and suddenly
shop architects.
And shop architects, and suddenly the High Line was that string which was through these areas, and architects around the world suddenly started to build. And these architects got their access ticket to be in New York. And that didn't happen so much, at least in my mind, before, right? And that changing of the guards is where architects suddenly got more approachable. You could look into these buildings and you had all kinds of crazy shapes, and it was like people talked about it, right? And then at the same time, the waterfront opened up, and that's a huge opportunity. So Brooklyn, but also downtown Manhattan, you have these parks where buildings and open space suddenly merge. You have public plazas, you can look out of the water. Amazing plants and trees were suddenly there, with pavilions which were all highly designed. So it was kind of Copenhagen meets New York, right? And it has a lot to do with Scandinavian and Asian or Japanese influence, what happened here over the last 20 years. And I think that influenced to a certain degree the debate about architecture and how far we can go. Yeah.
I think this creates expectations. If you once walk over the High Line, why shouldn't you borrow look similar or have this quality also? Yeah. So once you experience it, and you have to process it certainly as into your mind that that should be the standard, basically, or could be the standard.
Or the standard is I don't mind to pay more for the square footage of my apartment because I have that amazing park in front of me, right? Or I can see the water. So suddenly there was also a financial
kind of exchange.
Exchange between public space and what it means building directly next to it. And that literally happened under Bloomberg.
But I think, it's really Mayor Bloomberg, he kind of...
Incentive, that was the word where I was looking for. So there was an incentive to do better architecture because the city also did better public spaces.
Yeah. There's more value to it.
So I have to ask one question, which is like a prejudice question. When you think about building in New York and all these air rights and everything, you always think there's so many lawyers involved in building. Is this really your case? Is this also your case, or
what is involved?
Are lawyers involved a lot in the process, or?
There are, there are on different levels. I mean, there's what our office is dealing with is on a very small private scale, and of course there are borderlines and literally property lines which are in conflict with the person who is next to you, right? And that's a constant thing in high-density cities where you step on someone else's property or they have to give something up that you can do something. If it's just a scaffolding or a crane or just renovating something, you move into their private space to do so. And that's where you deal with lawyers who try to negotiate that in between. We were lucky how we operate that we never had bigger conflicts in this way. But when I clearly know when we scale that up, that's a given. I mean, that's just, you can't avoid it. There are always lawyers involved. Yeah, very much. And belongs actually to the fabric of building here. I mean, it's almost calculated into the financial aspect of buildings.
And when you do architecture, is there a favorite moment in creating architecture?
That's a nice question. I like that question. Yeah, I mean, I think many on different levels, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's one thing, and I think we should both answer that question from our own perspective. I mean, I have very favorite moments to get to know clients, and everyone you meet in New York who is longer than a week here and made it has a very interesting story and has somewhat can back up their wishes, right? And that is always fantastic to get to know people. That's, I mean, for me, the biggest gift of this city. And then when you go further in the process, there are a lot of ups and downs and really a lot of unknowns, because we're building with old, fabric, and with clients who has their own things. And, as architecture is, it's a very human-driven service industry. And when you step through all that and you come out of this tunnel, at the end, when that new home or the new store or the new office is built, just a sheer gratitude from clients, right, who experience space and feel like they were part of it and made the right decisions, also made the right decisions to work with us or an architect at all, right? And it's not only the first time they walk in, but even after a year to hear back that their kids love it or whatever it is, or their employees. I mean, these are I think, like all architects work for, right? Is that about right?
Yeah. What about you as an architect?
Yeah, I enjoy many moments of the thing. But like the moment when you think you find the right concept after processing all the information and getting to know of the property and everything. So that's a very good one when you think you found that solution that might.
Yeah, when all the
and then
pieces
when
fit.
it's extra lucky when the client also thinks it's the right solution, then you can go on based on that.
But that is the solution.
Yeah.
So for us, we have to operate in such unknown field most of the time, where so just I mean, it's also interesting how architects work, right? So we are in our office, we're trying to keep it fairly open with multiple options where we think they are doable, and have them narrowed down from the environment, client, timeline, budget until that moment comes. Right? And at that point, we always hope that the client is so much on board that there is not that moment. They say, well, we have too little or too much glass, or sometimes, things get changed upside down. We try to kind of have multiple options to a linear approach to avoid that. And I think, at one point we have that.
Yeah, I have sometimes the moment when the client explains the project to somebody.
Yeah.
And gets all the important points I think that are important, right? So, okay, we succeeded. That's good.
Exactly.
Yeah, like they got it.
Yeah, they got it. We are on the same boat.
Yeah.
So that's fantastic.
I think the question why we are here is actually the one question I found really interesting, because it kind of summarizes a lot, and it is a very New York question, which is in everyone's mind. So it's not the easiest city to get comfortable, and there's certainly a time, and I see it constantly, when we have from our office is kind of the United Nation. I mean, there are people from Colombia, from Spain, from Albania, from China, Canada, and a couple of Americans. And some make it and will stay and thrive in New York, and other ones it's just not their thing. But for everyone, it takes a while to arrange your life and be open-minded to do so. And you get tested along the way. That's from bureaucracy, getting an apartment, all these typical things, until you really can settle down and say, I arrived here. And it took us also a while to get there, but what I love about the city is that it is very appreciative once you do so. And it's very appreciative and very open-minded. Nobody cares about your background. It's really what you bring to the table.
Yeah.
So if you can deliver and put action behind your words, you're welcome. And then it goes further into you're from Hawaii, you're from Germany, you're from Europe. These different things, how you bake them into your persona, into your office, then gain and set you apart from others. And I haven't experienced that in this way too much in my own environment in Europe or in Germany, that you get the chance without being x-rayed from head to toe. Mm-hmm. So that's why it was interesting with your question in the beginning, how hard it is to get a license here. We never had a client who asked us, are you licensed here or not, right? Because it's really what you bring to the table, and they will notice that very, very soon and very fast, right, if you can deliver.
Yeah, because in Austria you may not call yourself architect if you don't have the license.
Yeah.
But here also not.
You also have these frameworks, for sure. I mean, it's not that loosey-goosey, but it's more the interaction between humans, right, and how you go from there and how you find your first job. I mean, that was our conversation earlier, right, how you get projects. Is a huge thing, and there's a whole social network. But that social network is not necessarily based on how long were you licensed, or did you do 20 buildings or one, right? So that's great, and I love that really about the city, and I think that's one of the reasons why we're here, right?
Yeah, or you can also choose the path to go, the typical architecture path. I think New York just offered so many different ways to do, to create architecture. So it's,
The circumstances to survive in New York are pretty hard, from my point of view.
Yeah.
So this stresses a lot, like in your life.
But yes and no. I don't know. I think it's hard here, but it's not. It's not impossible.
Okay.
So it's then I get to a point where it's not really hard,
I mean, there's also a big award to that you're dealing with people who went through the same, right? And therefore there's a kind of a selective selection process who you meet, therefore. And we were are very lucky that we have amazing clients, and I rarely have the day that I say, I want to leave architecture, or why do I do that, or something. It was, and that's one thing which I always compare, where it was really grim, especially in Germany, to work there, where people left the field. We never had that. There are bad days for sure, and things go wrong, but that has very little to do with clients or how we are treated or anything like that. So that is one big thing, right? Where you can find.
Sounds great.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, really I can honestly say that. I mean, yeah.
Well, yeah, we can honestly say that we have good clients, and we're always surrounded by very interesting people where you can have different exchanges, and different people from different walks of life. That's kind of the cool.
Well, I think this is when people decide to go and study architecture, that's a point they don't think about, that when you're doing architecture you meet so many people and every day is different, and
but that's the
beauty
of
challenges
that's
are
the
always
beauty of
it's
architecture.
Yeah.
It's not so it is not so linear. There's so many things you can gain from it, and a lot of it is about life in the end, or just kind of understanding how to resolve different things in life. Maybe that's why I say it's not so hard in New York after a while. In the end, I think it has nothing to do with money or anything. I think you can always find your way, like we talked earlier about being a banker. It's like, yeah, we cannot be a banker and live like in some kind of fancy penthouse in the city, but that's also not what we want,
And the most amazing thing about that in New York, that when you work, I mean, we work here now for how long? 20 years or so.
For 20 years, yeah.
It really doesn't matter in which neighborhood we are. We work in one or the other thing, right? We know these buildings from inside, and it's such a great history for ourselves. I mean, you get to know your own city so well, and I'm sure that's the same for you in Vienna, that you at home. Right?
But then you go like through the streets and I changed this flat, I changed it.
That happened here,
we worked
right?
on
or I never got that job, right? Or
Exactly.
something like that. Or this is still there, and oh my God, this building is already down, right? So I think that is grounding you, right? That grounding you versus other professions where you move, like I guess you work in the financial industry and you move money from A to B. You can never touch that, or
But I think it's very hollow, like to do that, like creating wealth with other wealth. Yeah, it's not.
Yeah, I guess it depends on what you value.
Yeah.
This was another episode of Apalava, Architecture on the Radio. I was guest of Kit and Phillip vonDalwig, who run their office in Brooklyn, New York. We have talked about the circumstances of creating architecture and run an office in the Big Apple. For more information, visit their website at vonDalwig.com. A large number of previous episodes of Apalava can be found at apalava.com. The site was recently relaunched thanks to the Austrian Chamber of Architects and the Ministry of Arts, Public Service and Sports. We have added an English tag, so you can easily find all the episodes in English. Subscribe to the Apalava mailing list and follow the series on social media. As the editor of the series, I, David Paschek, wish you a nice day.